Captain Hanwoo walked slowly across the huge bridge of the battleship Terra's Fury. The ship had been sleeping in deep space for 3 long years, floating like a ghost between the stars. Far from any planet or sun, the massive warship had been. Waiting in the cold darkness for orders that might never come. The bridge was bigger than most buildings back on Earth. Thick metal walls stretched up toward the ceiling, covered with screens and control panels that glowed softly in the dim light. Rows of crew stations spread out across the floor where officers and technicians worked quietly at their jobs. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and hot metal from the ship's massive engines. Hanwoo stopped at the main viewing window and stared out at the endless black void dotted with distant stars. He was a tall man with weathered skin and dark eyes that had seen too many battles. His uniform was simple blue fabric with silver rank badges that marked him as the ship's commander. For 3 years he had kept his crew ready for war that seemed like it might never come behind him. Commander Park Soo-min worked at the tactical station, her fingers dancing over holographic controls that showed star maps and fleet positions. She was younger than the captain, with short black hair and quick, intelligent eyes that missed nothing when she spoke. Her voice was calm, but Hanwoo could hear the worry underneath. The communication systems had been buzzing all morning with urgent messages from Earth Command. After years of silence, the military headquarters was suddenly flooding their receivers with priority transmissions. Each message painted a darker picture of what was happening in human space. Park Soo-min turned from her station with bad news written across her face. Captain, the latest intelligence reports are coming in now. The Confederation of Unified Worlds has issued their final ultimatum to Earth Command. They want us to abandon all human colonies beyond the Sol system and accept their authority over our species. Hanwoo nodded slowly. This was what they had been preparing for during their long wait in space. The alien Confederation had treated humans like primitive children since first contact, treating Earth like a backward planet that needed guidance from superior civilizations. But humans had always been a stubborn species, and some things were worth fighting for. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho looked up from his engineering console where streams of data showed the ship's awakening systems. The young officer had been barely out of the academy when they started their long patrol, but 3 years of maintaining the Terra's Fury had turned him into one of the best engineers in the human fleet. Sir, the main engines are coming online now. All fusion reactors are showing green status, and our weapon systems are charging to full power. The ship is ready for combat operations whenever you give the order. The Terra's Fury was not like other human warships. She was 3 kilometers of pure destruction, built in secret shipyards hidden beyond Neptune, where no alien scouts could find them. The Hurricane-class battleship was humanity's greatest secret, a weapon designed to show the galaxy that humans would not go quietly into slavery. Hanwoo had commanded smaller ships during the early years of human expansion, but nothing had prepared him for the raw power of the Terra's Fury. Her main guns could punch holes through asteroids, and her armor was thick enough to stop energy weapons that could crack planets. The ship carried enough firepower to level entire cities and the will to use it if threatened. The captain walked between the crew stations, checking on his officers and technicians. Each person on this bridge had volunteered for a mission that might be suicide. They all knew that the Confederation fleet was bigger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever faced before. But they also knew that sometimes being outgunned just meant you had to be smarter and meaner than your enemies. Commander Park Soo-min pulled up tactical displays showing the latest intelligence about Confederation forces. The alien fleet numbered over 800 warships, each one larger than the biggest human vessel. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth. Science with gravity weapons that could crush ships, like tin cans, and energy shields that bent space itself around their hulls. But the aliens had never fought humans before. They had conquered dozens of other species through superior technology and overwhelming force, expecting quick surrenders from primitive civilizations that knew they were outmatched. The Confederation had grown comfortable with easy victories against enemies who gave up without real fights. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho monitored the ship's massive weapon systems as they powered up for the first time in years. The Terra's Fury carried kinetic cannons that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, turning simple metal into devastating weapons. Point defense systems covered every angle with rapid-fire guns that could track thousands of targets at once. The human approach to warfare was different from alien tactics. Instead of relying on energy, weapons, and exotic technology, Earth's engineers had focused on raw kinetic force and thick armor plating the Terras. Fury was built like an ancient castle designed to take punishment and keep fighting long after more advanced ships would have been destroyed. Han Wu opened the ship-wide communication channel to address his crew of 2,000 brave men and women scattered throughout the battleship's corridors and weapon bays. His voice echoed through every section from the engine rooms, deep in the ship's belly to the gun turrets that bristled along her armored hull. Attention, all hands, this is your captain speaking. For 3 years we have waited in the darkness preparing for this moment. The alien confederation has demanded that humanity bow down and accept their rule over our species. They believe that superior technology makes them our masters, but they have never met humans who refuse to kneel. They have never faced a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Today we show them what happens when you threaten the children of Earth. Today we remind the galaxy that some things are worth any price. The crew responded with determination that had been building for years of preparation. Every person aboard the Terra's Fury knew they were about to face impossible odds against an enemy that considered humans barely more intelligent than animals. But they carried something the galaxy had forgotten: the terrible fury of a peaceful species pushed too far. Park Soo-min reported that long-range sensors were detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space. The Confederation fleet was moving toward Earth colonies with the confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. They expected quick victories and total surrender, just like every other conquest in their long history, but humanity had spent the last decade preparing for this war. Hidden shipyards had been building Hurricane-class battleships while military scientists developed new weapons and tactics. The Terra's Fury was just the first of her kind, with sister ships already under construction in secret facilities throughout the outer solar system. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho announced that all systems were now operating at full capacity. The battleship's fusion reactors burned hotter than small stars, feeding power to weapons that could crack moons. The ship's artificial gravity systems hummed quietly while life support recycled air and water for the crew that would soon need every advantage to survive. Han Wu looked out at the stars one more time before giving the order that would change everything. The Terra's Fury had been sleeping long enough, and now it was time to wake up the galaxy to show them what human determination looked like when backed by 3 kilometers of the most dangerous warship ever built. The sleeping giant was finally ready to open her eyes. The Confederate fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the human colony world of New Sol like a swarm of angry metal insects. Their ships moved in perfect formations that spoke of centuries of military training and countless victories over primitive species. The alien vessels gleamed under the light of the system's star, their hulls smooth and curved like living creatures. Admiral Vex Coral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Stellar Dominance, watching tactical displays that showed the pathetic human defenses. The colony had only a few small patrol ships and orbital defense platforms that looked like toys compared to his mighty fleet. This would be another easy victory to add to his long list of conquered worlds. The alien admiral was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 arms that moved gracefully as he gave orders to his crew. His species had been part of the Confederation for over 1,000 years, and they had never lost a major battle. The humans were just another primitive race that would learn to bow before superior technology and firepower. Captain Han Wu watched the enemy formation through the tactical displays on the Terra's Fury, studying their movement patterns and weapon placements. The Confederate ships relied heavily on energy shields and plasma weapons that had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced humans before, and they did not understand what desperate people could accomplish. The Hurricane-class battleship hung in space behind the alien fleet like a dark storm cloud waiting to strike. Her hull was covered in thick armor plating and weapon ports. Instead of the smooth energy field generators that protected Confederate vessels, the Terra's Fury looked primitive and brutal compared to the elegant alien ships, but looks could be very deceiving. Commander Park Soo-min coordinated the attack from her tactical station, targeting the Confederate flagship with their most powerful weapons. Humanity's secret Advantage was not energy beams or exotic technology, but good old-fashioned kinetic force. The battleship's main guns fired solid projectiles, accelerated to incredible speeds that could punch through any shield. The first salvo struck Admiral Vex, Coral's flagship, like hammers hitting glass. The kinetic rounds punched completely through the energy barriers and tore deep holes in the alien hull atmosphere, vented into space in bright streams, while internal explosions lit up the dreadnought. From inside, the Confederate crew had never experienced such devastating damage from primitive weapons. Immediately, the alien fleet returned fire with their plasma cannons, sending beams of superheated energy toward the human battleship. The attacks washed over the Terra's Fury's heavy armor, plating like water over stone, causing superficial damage but nothing that threatened the ship's fighting ability. Human engineers had built their vessel to absorb punishment that would destroy more advanced ships. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho managed the point defense systems as Confederate fighter craft swarmed toward the human battleship, expecting to find weak spots in primitive technology. Instead, they met walls of projectile fire from automated gun systems that tracked targets faster than alien reflexes could respond. The small craft exploded like fireworks against the battleship's defensive screen. Admiral Vex Coral could not believe what he was seeing on his damage control displays. His flagship was badly hurt, with primary systems failing throughout the ship. The human weapons were crude and simple, but they hit with devastating force that his shields could not fully absorb. This was not how battles were supposed to go against primitive species. The Terra's Fury turned slowly to bring her port weapon batteries to bear on the Confederate cruisers that were trying to flank her position. Captain Han Woo gave the order to fire, and dozens of kinetic cannons spoke at once, sending metal projectiles screaming through space at velocities that turned them into pure destructive energy. Too, Confederate cruisers simply disintegrated under the barrage, their hulls unable to withstand impacts that hit like small asteroids. The third cruiser tried to retreat, but the Terra's Fury's guns tracked it across space until it too exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the battlefield. Alien crew members who had expected easy victory now faced a nightmare of human determination. Commander Park Soo-min reported that the Confederate formation was breaking apart as ships tried to withdraw from weapons they did not understand. The aliens had grown comfortable with clean technological warfare, where energy shields and plasma beams decided battles quickly and efficiently. They were not prepared for the brutal reality of kinetic weapons that smashed through their defenses, but the Terra's Fury was taking damage too. Confederate plasma beams had burned through armor plating in several locations, and some of the ship's weapon systems were offline. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho coordinated damage control teams that worked frantically to keep critical systems operational while the battle raged around them. The human battleship fought like a cornered animal, using her massive guns to keep the Confederate fleet at a distance, while her thick armor absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser vessels. Every shot from the Terra's Fury sent shockwaves through the alien formation, as ships that had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves outmatched by primitive human engineering. Admiral Vex Coral realized that his easy victory had turned into a disaster. The humans were not surrendering as expected, but fighting with a ferocity that his species had forgotten centuries ago. His flagship was crippled, and 3 of his best cruisers were drifting wreckage. The primitive battleship seemed unstoppable as she carved through his formation like a blade through silk. Captain Han Woo knew that they could not stay and fight the entire Confederate fleet. The Terra's Fury was powerful, but she was still just one ship against hundreds. The purpose of this battle was not to win, but to send a message that humanity would not go quietly into slavery. They had drawn first blood and shown the galaxy that humans could hurt their oppressors. The Hurricane-class battleship began to withdraw toward the edge of the star system, her guns never silent as they continued to pound Confederate vessels that tried to pursue her point defense systems, destroyed fighter squadrons, while her main batteries targeted anything large enough to threaten her escape. The aliens found themselves unable to catch or stop the human warship as the Terra's Fury jumped into hyperspace. Admiral Vex Coral stared at the wreckage floating around his damaged flagship. 3 Confederate cruisers had been completely destroyed, and his own dreadnought would need months of repairs. The humans had achieved something that no primitive species had ever done before they had hurt the Confederation and lived to tell about it. The Battle of New Sol was over, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy for years to come. The Confederate fleet had learned that humans were not like other conquered species. They would fight with weapons and tactics that defied conventional wisdom, and they would make their enemies pay dearly for every victory. News of the engagement spread through Confederate communication networks faster than light itself. For the first time in centuries, a primitive species had not only refused to surrender, but had actually damaged their fleet. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was unlike anything they had faced before, and the Terra's fury was just the beginning of their nightmare. News of the battle at New Sol traveled across the galaxy faster than the ships that fought it. Confederate communication networks buzzed with reports that seemed impossible to believe. A primitive human vessel had attacked their fleet, and actually one, destroying 3 advanced cruisers and badly damaging the flagship Stellar Dominance before escaping into hyperspace on a dozen. Confederate worlds' military commanders stared at battle recordings that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. The human battleship had absorbed plasma fire that should have vaporized any vessel, then returned attacks with crude kinetic weapons that punched through energy shields like they were made of paper. The implications were terrifying. For a civilization built on technological superiority, Captain Han Wu stood in the damaged bridge of the Terra's fury as repair crews worked to fix systems damaged in their first engagement with the Confederate fleet. Burn marks scarred the metal walls where plasma beams had penetrated their armor, and several crew stations remained dark from overloaded circuits. The ship bore her wounds proudly like a warrior, showing off battle scars. Commander Park Soo-min analyzed intelligence reports flowing in from human spy networks throughout Confederate space. The aliens were mobilizing their largest fleets in response to the humiliation at New Sol. Massive armadas were gathering at military bases across the galaxy, preparing for a coordinated assault that would crush human resistance once and for all. The Confederate High Council had issued emergency orders calling for the complete destruction of Earth and all human colonies. They could not allow word of their defeat to spread among the other primitive species under their control if humans could successfully resist Confederate authority. Then every oppressed race in the galaxy might begin to question their master's lieutenant. Kim Jae-ho monitored long-range sensors as the Terra's fury hunted Confederate supply convoys in the empty space between star systems. The Hurricane-class battleships struck fast and hard against cargo vessels and fuel tankers before disappearing into the void like a ghost. Each attack sent shockwaves through the alien empire, proving that humans could strike anywhere at any time, but humanity was not relying on just one battleship to win their war. Hidden shipyards throughout the Sol system worked around the clock to complete more Hurricane-class vessels, while human colonies prepared for siege warfare that could last for decades. The Terra's fury had bought them precious time, but everyone knew that the real war was just beginning. On the bridge of his replacement flagship, Admiral Vex Coral studied tactical reports about human military capabilities. The aliens had underestimated their opponents, treating them like every other primitive species that had fallen before Confederate might, but humans were different in ways that his military analysts were only beginning to understand. The human approach to warfare puzzled Confederate strategists who had grown comfortable with clean technological battles. Their weapons were crude but effective, their ships were ugly but nearly indestructible, and their tactics were brutal but successful. The Terra's fury fought like a wild animal, using raw aggression to overcome superior alien technology. Captain Han Wu knew that each successful raid increased the pressure on human space. Confederate fleets were converging from across the galaxy, bringing enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. The aliens had been embarrassed by their defeat, and embarrassed predators were always the most dangerous kind, but something unexpected was happening in the darker corners of the galaxy. Species that had been conquered by the Confederation centuries ago were beginning to whisper about the humans who had fought back, and one small acts of sabotage and rebellion started appearing on worlds where aliens had ruled unopposed for generations. Commander Park Soo-min received encrypted messages from resistance groups on Confederate worlds asking for human advisors and weapons. The Terra's fury had become more than just a battleship. She was a symbol of hope for every oppressed species that had ever dreamed of freedom. The galaxy was changing and humanity stood at the center of that transformation. The Confederate government tried to suppress news of their defeat, but information spread through black market communication. Networks faster than their sensors could stop it. Alien civilians who had never questioned their leaders began asking uncomfortable questions about military failures and the cost of eternal expansion. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho coordinated with human intelligence operatives who reported growing unrest on dozens of Confederate worlds. The empire that had seemed unshakable was developing cracks as subject species realized that their masters could be hurt, could be made to bleed. The psychological impact of humanity's victory was spreading like wildfire on Earth. Military planners worked desperately to prepare for the coming storm. They knew that the Confederate response would be massive and merciless, designed to make an example of humanity that would terrify other species into submission. But humans had always been a stubborn people, and they were prepared to make their enemies pay dearly for every victory. The Terra's Fury continued her hunting mission, striking at Confederate supply lines and communication relays with ruthless efficiency. Each successful attack weakened the alien war machine while boosting human morale. The Hurricane-class battleship had become the scourge of Confederate space, a nightmare that haunted alien commanders who could never predict where she would strike next. Captain Han-woo received reports from human colonies throughout the Outer Rim where civilians were evacuating to hidden bases and underground shelters. The coming war would be fought not just in space but on planets and moons where human determination would face alien technology in battles that would determine the future of both species. The galaxy watched and waited as two very different approaches to warfare prepared to clash. The Confederation relied on overwhelming technological superiority and coordinated fleet actions that had crushed dozens of civilizations. Humanity depended on individual initiative, stubborn determination, and weapons designed to cause maximum damage at any cost. Commander Park Soo-min updated tactical projections showing Confederate fleet movements toward human space. The aliens were bringing everything they had: battleships and carriers, cruisers and destroyers, support vessels and troop transports. The largest military force in galactic history was mobilizing to end the human rebellion before it could inspire others to resist. But the Terra's Fury had already accomplished her most important mission. She had proven that the Confederate could be hurt, that their ships could be destroyed, and their fleets could be defeated. The psychological victory was worth more than any tactical advantage because it gave hope to every species that had ever been conquered. As the Hurricane-class battleship prepared for the next phase of the war, Captain Han-woo looked out at the stars, knowing that they carried the dreams of billions of oppressed beings. The Terra's Fury was no longer fighting just for humanity, but for the freedom of an entire galaxy. The real battle was just beginning. The Confederate response came in the form of the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Over 2,000 warships gathered at the edge of human space, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars like a metal constellation of death and destruction. Each vessel carried enough firepower to level cities, and together they represented the full military might of an empire that had conquered half. The Galaxy Supreme Admiral Zex Morak commanded from the bridge of the Super Dreadnought Galaxy's Fist, a massive vessel that stretched 5 kilometers from bow to stern. This monster of alien engineering carried planet-killing weapons and armor thick enough to withstand direct hits from stellar bombardment. The ship was designed specifically to end rebellions with overwhelming force. Captain Han-woo studied the enemy formation from the bridge of the Terra's Fury, knowing that this battle would determine whether humanity lived as free beings or died as an example to other species. The Confederate fleet was arranged in perfect attack formations, with heavy battleships in the center surrounded by cruiser squadrons and destroyer screens that covered every possible approach. Humanity had managed to complete 2 more Hurricane-class battleships during the months since the battle at New Seoul, the Storm's Edge under Captain Lee Da-hai and Thunder's Call commanded by Captain Choi Min-soo had joined the Terra's Fury for what might be the final battle of the war. 3 ships against 2,000 seemed like impossible odds even by human standards. Commander Park Soo-min coordinated with the other Hurricane-class captains through encrypted communication channels that the Confederate could not intercept. Together, they planned humanity's most desperate gambit. Instead of trying to fight the entire alien fleet, they would strike directly at its heart, targeting the super dreadnought that commanded the Armada. 3 Hurricane-class battleships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive hulls painted in the blue and white and green colors of Earth's flag. They had chosen to carry the hopes of every human colony into the greatest battle their species had ever fought, knowing that defeat meant the extinction of everything they loved. Supreme Admiral Zex Morak was confident in his overwhelming superiority, watching tactical displays that showed the pathetic human force approaching his mighty Armada. 3 primitive vessels against the greatest fleet in Confederate history seemed like a joke that would end quickly with total human annihilation. But the Hurricane-class ships did not fight like traditional warships, using careful formations and coordinated tactics instead. They attacked like pack hunters, using their incredible speed and thick armor to close distance, while their kinetic weapons carved through energy shields and alien hulls. The Confederate had never faced opponents who fought with such desperate fury. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho managed damage control as Confederate plasma beams scorched the Terra's Fury's armor plating, while human engineers worked frantically to keep critical systems online. The battleship shook under massive impacts that would have destroyed lesser vessels, but her thick metal skin held against everything the enemy could throw at her. The battle raged across empty space, with debris from destroyed ships creating a deadly maze of wreckage that made navigation treacherous. Both sides poured fire into each other at ranges where energy weapons and kinetic projectiles could cause devastating damage. The void between the fleets lit up with explosions that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Captain Lee Da-hai maneuvered the Storm's Edge through a gauntlet of Confederate cruisers, her ship's point defense systems working overtime to destroy incoming missiles and fighter craft. The Hurricane-class battleship's guns never stopped firing, sending solid projectiles at velocities that turned metal into pure destructive energy. The Thunder's Call under Captain Choi Min-soo bore the brunt of the Confederate counterattack as alien battleships concentrated their fire on the human vessel. Plasma beams burned through armor plating and internal explosions rocked the ship from bow to stern, but her crew kept fighting even as their vessel began to break apart around them. Supreme Admiral Zex Morak watched in growing horror as his carefully planned battle turned into a savage brawl that favored the human approach to warfare. The Confederate ships were individually superior, but they had been designed for clean technological conflicts, where energy shields and coordinated tactics decided outcomes quickly. The human battleships fought like wounded animals. Using every dirty trick and desperate tactic they could think of, they rammed and damaged Confederate vessels. They targeted enemy command centers with precision strikes, and they never stopped moving forward. No matter how much punishment they absorbed, the aliens began to panic as their formation started falling apart. Commander Park Soo-min coordinated the Terra's Fury's attack run toward the super dreadnought Galaxy's Fist, while Confederate escorts tried desperately to intercept the human battleship. Kinetic rounds from the ship's main guns cleared a path through the enemy formation, leaving behind burning wreckage and spreading fear among alien crews who had never faced such determination. The Thunder's Call finally succumbed to concentrated enemy fire, her hull splitting open like a flower of metal and flame. Captain Choi Min-soo and 800 crew members died in the explosion, but their sacrifice allowed the other 2 Hurricane-class ships to penetrate deeper into the Confederate formation. Their deaths would not be forgotten. Captain Hen Woo felt the loss of the Thunder's Call like a physical blow, but he could not stop to mourn the dead while the battle still raged. The Terra's Fury pushed forward through walls of plasma fire and missile barrages, her guns searching for the one target that could end this nightmare with a single decisive strike. The Storm's Edge fought alongside her sister ship as both Hurricane-class battleships carved their way toward the Confederate flagship. Alien vessels tried to block their path, but human kinetic weapons smashed through every obstacle with brutal efficiency. The 2 ships moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, their coordinated attacks devastating everything in their path. Supreme Admiral Zex Morak realized that his technological superiority was meaningless against opponents who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The humans fought with a savagery that his people had forgotten centuries ago, and their crude weapons were proving devastatingly effective against ships designed to fight other energy-based civilizations. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho reported that the Terra's Fury's main guns were ready for their final shot as the battleship closed to point-blank range with the super dreadnought Galaxy's Fist. The massive alien vessel loomed ahead like a metal mountain, bristling with weapons that could destroy planets, but Captain Han-woo felt no fear, only determination to end this war. The moment had come to prove that human stubbornness, backed by 3 kilometers of the most dangerous warship ever built, could overcome any odds. The Terra's Fury had carried her crew through impossible battles, and now she would either deliver humanity's greatest victory or die trying. The galaxy held its breath as 2 titans prepared for their final collision. The main guns of the Terra's Fury spoke with the voice of human determination, sending solid projectiles toward the Confederate super dreadnought. At velocities that turned simple metal into weapons of mass destruction, the kinetic rounds struck the Galaxy's Fist like the hammers of angry gods, punching completely through her massive hull and detonating her primary reactor in an explosion that lit up space like a newborn. Star Captain Han-woo watched through the bridge viewing ports as Supreme Admiral Zex Morak's flagship broke apart in slow motion, her death throes sending shockwaves through the Confederate fleet that could be felt on ships dozens of kilometers away. The super dreadnought that had been considered the galaxy's most powerful warship was reduced to expanding clouds of debris and radiation. For a moment both fleets stopped firing as crews on all sides stared in awe at the destruction of what many had thought was an invincible vessel. The Galaxy's Fist had been the pride of the Confederate Navy, a symbol of their technological superiority that was supposed to end rebellions with its mere presence. Now it was nothing but wreckage drifting through space. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Confederate ships throughout the battle zone began receiving panicked communications from their crews, asking how primitive human weapons could destroy their most advanced technology. Discipline started breaking down as alien officers questioned orders that had seemed reasonable when they thought victory was certain. Commander Park Soo-min coordinated the pursuit as human battleships chased fleeing Confederate vessels, their guns never silent in their work of liberation. Each destroyed alien ship sent a message that echoed across the galaxy through emergency communication channels that carried news faster than the speed of light itself. But victory had come at a terrible price that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The Thunder's call was gone, along with Captain Choi Min-soo and 800 brave crew members who had died to give humanity a chance at freedom. Their sacrifice had created the opening that allowed the Terra's Fury to reach the enemy flagship. The Storm's Edge limped through space on emergency power, her hull blackened and punctured in dozens of places where Confederate plasma beams had burned through her thick armor. Captain Lee Da-hai was badly wounded but still conscious, directing damage control teams that worked frantically to keep her ship from breaking apart. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho worked with engineering crews throughout the Terra's Fury to assess their condition and found that they had pushed their battleship far beyond her design limit. Systems throughout the ship showed stress fractures and overload damage from the incredible forces generated during their desperate attack. The Hurricane-class battleship had given everything she had to defend humanity, absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any other vessel while delivering the killing blow that ended Confederate dreams of easy conquest. Her armor was scarred and blackened, her hull punctured in places where alien weapons had found weak spots. Captain Han-woo felt the weight of command as he watched his damaged ship slowly turn away from the battlefield where hundreds of Confederate vessels were retreating in disorder. Their formation had collapsed completely when their flagship exploded, and now individual captains were making their own decisions about whether to continue fighting. Retreat quickly became a rout as Confederate ships abandoned the battle zone and jumped to hyperspace in whatever direction would take them away from the human battleships. News of their defeat was already spreading through their communication networks, causing panic on worlds that had never imagined their military could be beaten by primitive opponents. Commander Park Soo-min received damage Reports from all sections of the Terra's fury showing that while their ship was still functional, she would need months of repairs to return to full combat capability. They had won the battle, but at a cost that left them vulnerable to any Confederate forces that might rally for another attack. The Confederate fleet that had seemed invincible just hours before was now scattered across dozens of star systems as individual ships fled toward their home bases carrying news that would shake the foundations of their empire. The largest military force in galactic history had been broken by 3 human battleships and desperate courage. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho coordinated with rescue teams searching the wreckage of the Thunder's call for any survivors. But the explosion that had killed Captain Choi Min-soo had been too massive and too complete. There were no life signs among the debris that had once been humanity's newest warship and her heroic crew. As word of the Confederate defeat spread across the galaxy, something remarkable began to happen on worlds that had been oppressed for centuries. Species that had accepted alien domination as a fact of life started questioning whether their masters were truly invincible. The human victory had planted seeds of rebellion in millions of minds. Captain Han Woo opened communication channels to address not just his own crew, but the entire human fleet scattered throughout their territory. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Confederate forces would regroup and return with new strategies designed to counter human tactics and weapons. The Terra's fury had proven that determination and crude kinetic weapons could overcome technological superiority, but she had also shown that victory came at prices that could barely be afforded. Every human ship was precious, and every crew member was irreplaceable in the struggle for their species' survival. Commander Park Soo-min updated intelligence reports showing that remnants of the Confederate fleet were already regrouping at military bases throughout their territory. The aliens had learned that humans could not be easily conquered, but they had also learned valuable lessons about how to fight opponents who refused to follow conventional rules. The Storm's Edge broadcast distress signals as her damaged systems began failing faster than her crew could repair them. Captain Lee Da-hai requested permission to dock with the Terra's fury for emergency repairs, knowing that her ship might not survive the journey back to human space without immediate assistance. As the 2 surviving Hurricane-class battleships slowly made their way toward friendly territory, Captain Han Woo reflected on what they had accomplished and what it meant for the future. The Confederate Empire had suffered its first major defeat in centuries, proving that even the mightiest civilizations could fall when faced with opponents who refused to surrender. The galaxy would never be the same again. The myth of Confederate invincibility had been shattered by human stubbornness and the willingness to pay any price for freedom. News of the battle would inspire rebellions on dozens of worlds as oppressed species realized that their chains could be broken. But Captain Han Woo knew that this victory was just the beginning of a longer struggle. The Confederate would adapt and return with new weapons and new strategies. The Terra's fury had won the first round, but the fight for galactic freedom had only just begun. 6 months after the great battle that shattered the Confederate fleet, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The authority of the alien empire had collapsed on dozens of worlds as species after species threw off the chains of domination that had bound them for centuries. Humanity had become the symbol of resistance, with human advisors helping former Confederate subjects build their own fleets and defend their newly won independence. Captain Han Woo stood on the rebuilt bridge of the Terra's fury, watching as the first Galactic Freedom Alliance fleet assembled near Earth. Hundreds of ships from 20 different worlds flew in formation together, their crews trained by human officers who understood that freedom was always worth fighting for. The Hurricane-class battleship had become the flagship of a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. The Terra's fury herself bore the scars of battles fought for the right to exist free, but she had been rebuilt and upgraded with technologies shared by their new allies. Her hull gleamed with fresh armor plating, while her weapon systems incorporated improvements suggested by alien engineers who had learned to respect human approaches to warfare. Commander Park Soo-min now wore the insignia of an admiral, coordinating with former enemies who had become trusted allies. The transition from master and slave relationships to partnerships of equals was often difficult and sometimes violent, but the foundation For a new kind of galactic society had been laid in the wreckage of Confederate arrogance, the bridge of the Terras. Fury reflected these changes with alien officers working alongside humans at stations designed for multiple species. The Hurricane class battleship had become a symbol of cooperation where beings who had once tried to kill each other now worked together toward common goals of freedom and mutual defense. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho had been promoted to executive officer managing the integration of alien technologies with human engineering principles. The result was weapons systems that combined the best of both approaches, creating battleships that were even more formidable than the original Hurricane-class design. Admiral Park Soo-min received regular reports from across the galaxy where the Galactic Freedom Alliance was helping liberated worlds establish their own governments and defense forces. The work was slow and sometimes dangerous, but every species that joined their alliance made the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. Captain Han-woo knew that their victory was fragile and could be lost if they became complacent. Remnants of the Confederate fleet still lurked in the outer rim of the galaxy, gathering strength for counterattacks that would test the new alliance's resolve. There were also species that had benefited from Confederate rule and saw humanity as a threat to their privileged positions. The war for galactic freedom was far from over, with battles being fought on worlds whose names most humans had never heard. Reports came in daily of skirmishes between Alliance forces and Confederate holdouts who refused to accept that their empire was crumbling. The fighting was bitter and personal, with both sides knowing that defeat meant the end of their way of life. Something had changed in the galaxy that could never be undone. The myth of inevitable alien superiority had been shattered by human determination and the willingness to pay any price for freedom. Species that had accepted domination for centuries now believed that resistance was possible, and that belief was spreading like wildfire across civilized space. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho monitored intelligence reports showing Confederate forces massing for what appeared to be a final desperate assault on Earth. The aliens seemed to believe that if they could destroy the human homeworld, the rebellion would collapse and their authority could be restored across the galaxy. The Terra's Fury and her sister ships prepared for what might be the final battle of the war as Confederate remnants gathered their remaining strength for one last attempt at victory. The Hurricane-class battleships had been joined by vessels from dozens of allied species, creating the most diverse fleet in galactic history. Admiral Park Soo-min coordinated with alliance commanders whose species had once been mortal enemies, but were now united in their determination to prevent a return to the old system of Confederate domination. The diversity of their fleet was both a strength and a weakness, as different military traditions had to be merged into effective fighting. Units Captain Han-woo reflected on how far they had come from those dark days when the Confederate ultimatum had seemed to spell humanity's doom. The galaxy had learned to fear and respect the fury of humans pushed too far, but more importantly, it had learned to hope for a future where that fury could be channeled toward building something worth protecting. The bridge of the Terra's Fury buzzed with activity as crew members from a dozen species worked together preparing for the coming battle. Each person aboard the flagship knew that they were fighting not just for their own freedom, but for the right of every intelligent being to determine their own destiny. As the Allied fleet prepared to depart for their next mission, Captain Han-woo opened communication channels to address crews throughout the Armada. His words were translated into dozens of languages and broadcast to beings whose ancestors had never imagined they might someday fight as equals alongside their former oppressors. The Hurricane-class battleship Terra's Fury had done more than survive her battles against impossible odds. She had inspired an entire galaxy to dream of something better than endless submission to superior force. The ship and her crew had proven that sometimes a single vessel crewed by people who refused to surrender could change the course of history itself. The Alliance fleet moved out toward the stars, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of billions of beings who had finally learned that freedom was not something to be granted by others, but something to be taken and defended by those brave enough to fight for it. The galaxy would never again accept that might made right. Lieutenant Kim Jae-ho watched the stars wheel past the viewing ports, knowing that somewhere out there Confederate forces were preparing for their final desperate gambit. The outcome of the coming battle would determine whether the galaxy move forward toward a future of cooperation and mutual respect, or backward toward the dark days of empire and oppression? Admiral Park Soo-min studied tactical displays showing Alliance forces spreading throughout the galaxy, establishing bases and patrol routes that would protect newly liberated worlds from Confederate counterattacks. The work of building a free galaxy would take generations, but the foundation had been laid by those who refused to accept that freedom was impossible. The Terra's Fury sailed toward whatever battles awaited her in the vast darkness between the stars, her crew ready to face any enemy that threatened the fragile alliance they had helped create. The Hurricane-class battleship had become more than a weapon of war. She was hope given metal form, carrying the dreams of an entire galaxy toward a future that remained unwritten. Captain Han Wu looked out at the infinite expanse of space, knowing that their greatest victories still lay ahead. The galaxy had learned that humans would fight for their freedom, but now it would learn that they would fight just as hard to protect the freedom of others. The Terra's Fury and her crew sailed onward into history,